Today's episode of the Good Lawyers Gone Bad podcast is brought to you by my CLE programs. I call myself the CLE performer. I teach ethics CLE, and I gave myself a ridiculous nickname because I know we need to get critical content. I just think it would be a nice idea if we could stay awake in the process. Go to my website, stuartteicher.com, to find information about my speaking topics. Welcome to the Good Lawyers Gone Bad podcast. My name is Stuart Teicher. Today's episode is called A Swindler's Swan Song, Conn's Clever Con. It's an interesting story about, well, a swindler. Get out there and show the podcast some love, huh? Wherever you listen to it, please go there and rate us and subscribe and like us and maybe even leave a review. That would be wonderful. A little housekeeping going forward. The next episode is going to drop in 2 weeks on May 23rd. And then I'll do one a little bit quicker on May 30th, and then we'll be back on track to do these episodes every 2 weeks on the 1st and the 15th of the month. So enjoy today's program, A Swindler's Swan Song, Conn's Clever Con. What does a fugitive look like? Someone running from the law, you know? If you were standing right in front of a wanted man, would you know it? The clerk at a Walmart in New Mexico did not. I would think that a person being hunted by the FBI would look scary. You know, scars on his neck, maybe a face tattoo. Someone who looked like they were armed and dangerous. But the 70-year-old man who walked up to the counter in a Walmart in New Mexico wearing a black t-shirt and jeans, well, he seemed nice enough. A few minutes before that, he was test driving a bicycle in the store, and now he was smiling pleasantly while settling up at the counter. Is this what someone with a bounty on their head is supposed to look like? Someone running from the law, facing decades in prison? They're not supposed to be looking so casual, are they? The man must have known he was being captured by the store's security camera, but it seems that he didn't care. And if this guy posed any danger, then it certainly wasn't apparent. He simply paid for his bottle of water and a burrito and vanished. There are several things that scarred me as a youth. Now, I've already explained to you about how my mother tortured me with clothing, and I talked to you about that during the Giuliani episode. I'm not going to rehash that here. From now on, I will only discuss that with my therapist. Over and over and over again, most likely for the rest of my life. No, that's not where I'm going now. There is something else that scarred me, and I remember it so vividly. I wonder if any of you shared this experience. Did you have to get scoliosis checks in middle school? Do they still do that to kids? If you had to get scoliosis checks and you are likewise scarred, or if you know whether they still do that in middle school because I'm curious, send me a tweet to either inform me or commiserate. My Twitter is Lawyers Gone Bad. Just one word, at Lawyers Gone Bad. For those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about with the scoliosis checks, this is what would happen. In middle school, there would be one day of gym class where you didn't play volleyball or try to climb ropes or do whatever else that they had you doing. Instead, they would make us all strip down to our underwear and stand in a line in the locker room to get checked for scoliosis. Now, that doesn't sound so terrible, unless you had boy boobs, which, let's just say I'm thinking about doubling my therapy sessions. Anyway, you'd wait in line, and when it was your turn, you'd bend over, and they'd look at the curvature of your spine to make sure that you didn't have any signs of scoliosis. Now, scoliosis can be serious. It's a condition where the spine curves abnormally. It can cause pain, and a bad curve in the spine can push on the lungs, making it harder to breathe. It's often diagnosed in the teen years, which makes me understand why I had to stand half naked in front of Mr. Emery as a youth. Of course, I didn't appreciate the seriousness of the condition in middle school. The only things those scoliosis checks were for me was a reminder that I was clearly maturing far slower than the other boys in my school. While I might not have appreciated the potentially devastating health effects of scoliosis, a woman named Mary Sexton certainly did. Mary Sexton is a woman from Kentucky, and her back was a real problem. Not only did she suffer from scoliosis, but she also needed spinal surgery to fuse vertebrae in her neck. Her condition was so bad that it left her with a limp. All of that, however, seems to have paled in comparison with her other issues. Mary suffered from chronic headaches and kidney problems, which caused her to drop out of college. And then, maybe worst of all, she developed a serious medical condition that required brain surgery. 2 surgeries, actually, at least one of which left her temporarily blind at one point. Mary Sexton's health issues were so severe that she couldn't work, and she had no choice but to try to get Social Security disability benefits from the government. Social Security Disability Insurance, or SSDI, is a government program that's designed to help the most vulnerable among us, people who have become disabled and can't provide for themselves. The system provides monthly payments to people who have a disability that limits their ability to work. People like Mary Sexton who have crippling maladies that make it impossible for them to support themselves. But here's the problem. Securing those benefits is such a complex process that, and I'm only half joking when I say this, it's such an arduous process that I think Mary Sexton would have preferred brain surgery over trying to get disability. And if you know anything about the SSDI system, then you know I'm really only half joking. It is a royal pain in the ass. I mean, have you ever tried to get anything from the government? It takes forever, and the process is always super complicated. There are applications that you need to fill out. You need to get medical forms filled out by doctors. The content of all those things needs to be provided consistent with massive regulations. I mean, the regulations are just voluminous. It's just incredible. Okay, a little bit of a rant here. How does the government expect someone with a disability to be able to get that all done? Someone like Mary Sexton, I don't know, maybe when she's regaining her eyesight from her brain surgery, she can peruse the thousands of pages of government regulations. Or maybe when she's up all night battling her headaches, she could gather her medical records. I mean, she is awake, right? Or maybe she could get some help. And where would she go for that help? Mary Sexton needed someone who knew the disability system, and she needed someone who had both the vigilance and intelligence necessary to navigate and conquer what can only be considered a massively difficult process. She needed a lawyer. Luckily for Mary Sexton, the 3rd largest disability law firm in the country just happened to be located in her home state of Kentucky. That was no coincidence. There's a good reason for it. I was traveling for work once. I teach attorney ethics CLE programs for a living. That's not a shameless plug for the way I make my living. It's an actual plug for the way I make my living. If you want an entertaining ethics CLE, reach out to me, stuartteicher.com. So I was on a plane, and as I'm getting to my seat, the person who's sitting in the window seat is already there. And as I get closer to the aisle, I realize that I am looking at the largest human I have ever seen. He was muscular and just thick and dense. He had muscles from the top of his head to the bottom of his toes. And there weren't any joints in his body. There were just like muscular body parts connected by other muscles. You know what he looked like? Did you ever go to Rockefeller Center in New York City and see the statue of Atlas holding up the world? It's right across the street from St. Patrick's Cathedral. That is how this guy was built. Except instead of being sprawled out majestically next to a skyscraper in Rockefeller Center, he was wedged into the window seat on an airplane. And I mean wedged into that seat. I spoke to him for a few moments, which is something I usually never do. I really try not to talk to people that I sit next to on airplanes because you always end up having to have that conversation. When I tell them that I'm a lawyer, what ends up happening is that we have to have a conversation about their legal issue, which invariably is going to have nothing to do with the type of law I've ever practiced in my life. Anyway, when I sat next to this guy, I needed to know what his story was. What did this mountain of a man do for a living? And he explained that he was a coal miner. When I heard that, I realized that there were 2 things I did not know. First, I did not know how this guy fit in a coal mine. I mean, I've never been in one, but I can't imagine that they're very spacious. Second, I did not know that they still had coal miners. But oh yeah, they do. There are still some 45,000 coal miners in the United States, and ground zero for that job is in the small coal mining towns of the Appalachia region in Kentucky. It's there that men grew up watching their fathers work long shifts in the mines. They live in towns that revolve around coal, and usually by the time a young man reaches 20 years old, he'd find himself underground, operating heavy equipment in dim, dusty tunnels. And the work is grueling. Workers spend long shifts running equipment like continuous miners or roof bolters. These are machines that literally cut coal out of the earth or secure the mine ceilings. Now, imagine that you're one of those 20-year-old men running one of these pieces of equipment. The machines generate intense vibrations that radiate through your operator's seat, jarring your spine and joints. You're literally sitting there for an entire day, being shaken. And as you'd imagine, that takes a toll on your body. For many, over years, the constant shaking contributes to degenerative disc disease and chronic lower back pain because the spinal discs wear down under the relentless motion. And when you're not operating machinery, you're doing tough manual labor. You're moving heavy tools, you're moving steel supports, maybe even moving coal chunks. You're lifting and twisting on uneven footing, and you're in a low-ceilinged mine, and that puts immense pressure on your lower back, and it contributes to herniated discs and muscle strains. By the time you're in your late 30s, these cumulative stresses leave you with chronic pain and limited mobility. Medical imaging might reveal disc damage and joint inflammation, conditions directly tied to the physical demands of your years in the mine. These injuries, common among your fellow miners, make it impossible for you to continue physically demanding work, and as your health declines, you have no choice but to be pushed towards Social Security disability insurance. And that is why a lawyer named Eric Conn set up shop in coal mining country. His office in the small town of Stanville, Kentucky, became a powerhouse for Social Security disability cases. How? Well, every time one of those miners went limping over to the local Piggly Wiggly, that's a grocery store for you Northerners. Yeah, every time they went over there, they grabbed a shopping cart and they saw an advertisement for Mr. Social Security, Eric Conn. That's what he called himself sometimes. Sometimes he called himself Mr. Social Security. Other times he called himself the E-Man. Whatever it was, the coal miners saw him. The Mary Sextons of the world saw him. In fact, you couldn't listen to the radio or watch television without seeing one of Eric Conn's commercials. That includes the 3D commercial he created that required special glasses to see properly. Oh yeah, he was on radio, TV, billboards, shopping carts, you name it. He even had a 24/7 hotline set up and a group that he called the Conn Hotties, young women clad in firm t-shirts that he sent to public events. But even with a massive ad budget, and even with an office in a locale with a built-in client base, it's still tough to make money as an SSDI lawyer. That's because Social Security disability insurance cases take a lot of time. According to the Social Security Administration's website, it takes 7 months for them to process a claim. Can you believe that? I mean, if you're a person who's been injured, you have to wait 7 months to get your Social Security disability. What do you do during that time? You live off whatever savings you have, if you have any? I would think that if politicians on both sides of the aisle really cared about their constituents, they would focus their time on speeding up processes like that, the parts of the government that really help the most vulnerable among us. Anyway, it takes 7 months to get benefits, and that is the average, which means that if you have a particularly tough case, you're waiting even longer. And that means that lawyers like Eric Conn are waiting like a year for a fee on a client's file. That's only one problem with being a Social Security disability lawyer, the delay in getting fees. The other is about the amount of those fees. You see, the amount you can get is capped by law. SSDI lawyers get paid by getting a percentage of the past due benefits that they recover for clients. What does that mean? Imagine you're someone who's disabled. You've been trying to get your benefits, but the government is stringing you along. Maybe there were technical things wrong with your application, so they rejected it. Then there was a problem with the hospital records, so they rejected it. Your doctor didn't write what they needed to write properly in accordance with the regulations exactly, so they rejected it. You know, that sort of thing. Before you know it, a year has gone by and you have nothing. So you go to a lawyer to help you collect. The lawyer does their thing and they're successful in getting the government to pay you the money you were owed. Let's say it's $150,000 in past due benefits. The lawyer gets paid by getting a percentage of those past due benefits. But here's the thing. The amount the lawyer can get is capped. The most a lawyer can take is 25%. So 25% of $150,000 is $37,500. Except the overall amount of the fee is also capped. So even though 25% would be $37,500, the maximum fee a lawyer can actually take is capped at $9,200 by law. Now listen, $9,200 is a lot of money where I come from. But the thing about being a lawyer is that you gotta feed the beast. The overhead kills you. Like every business, running a law office costs a lot of money and you need to generate a constant flow of income to keep things going. That's why Eric Conn didn't build a law office. He built a well-oiled machine. Eric Conn's law firm was a bustling hub of efficiency that churned out Social Security disability approvals with assembly line precision. It was housed in a sprawling complex where he had a 19-foot statue of Abraham Lincoln. The office employed around 50 staff members, including paralegals, case managers, and administrative workers, each of whom helped process thousands of client cases with streamlined coordination. Clients like Mary Sexton were guided through a polished intake process, with Conn's team handling complex SSA paperwork, scheduling medical evaluations, and preparing appeals with meticulous detail. He even had a replica Social Security hearing room built on site because it allowed clients to rehearse their testimonies so they could be confident when they had to face a judge. He had a network of doctors who evaluated clients, and to make things move quickly, he set up a medical suite in his office where the doctors could see the clients. Those doctors provided swift medical reports tailored to the Social Security Administration's criteria. This seamless operation was backed by cutting-edge technology and a charismatic leader, and it made Conn's firm a beacon of hope in eastern Kentucky. It delivered results that seemed almost miraculous. He was the Social Security disability king. And for folks like Mary Sexton, struggling after brain surgery and suffering with a bad back, Eric Conn was more than a king. He was a godsend. And that's why his clients worshipped him. And for that work, he was paid handsomely. Just do the math. Let's say Conn made a conservative $3,000 in fees on an individual file, right? A client matter, we call that a file. If he had 3,000 clients, that would be $9 million in fees. Yeah. In the years 2006 to 2010, the Social Security Administration paid him more than $10 million in fees. And that was just a 4-year period. The man practiced for over 20 years. Of course, he needed that kind of money. That is because it costs a lot to live like Eric Conn. Eric Conn lived a flamboyant, opulent lifestyle, indulging in the finer things with unabashed extravagance. He had a sprawling mansion in Pikeville, Kentucky, complete with a wine cellar and a home theater. He projected an image of untouchable wealth, driving luxury cars and wearing expensive watches that gleamed as brightly as his oversized ego. His global escapades included monthly vacations to exotic locales like Thailand, where you ready for this? Where he allegedly opened a Halloween-themed brothel. And all of this was eclipsed by his romantic exploits. Eric Conn was married over a dozen times. He once said that he actually lost count of how many times he was married. And most of those marriages were to much younger women. There was even a brief fling with a porn star that cemented his playboy persona. Eric Conn's mansion glittered, his promises sparkled, and it all just seemed too good to be true. What posters did you have on the walls of your college dorm room? I need to know. Go to Twitter, Lawyers Gone Bad. That's my Twitter handle, my X handle, at Lawyers Gone Bad. Let me know, what posters did you have on your college dorm room wall? I had two posters in particular that I remember. One was of Marilyn Monroe, who I am still obsessed with. Ooh, that scandal will be a good one for the podcast episode, don't you think? It's not about lawyers, but it's a heck of a scandal. If you think that'll make a good one, tell me on Twitter. So one poster was of Marilyn Monroe. The other poster was of the most famous person to ever come out of Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Can you guess who the most famous person is to come out of Myrtle Beach, South Carolina? The most famous person to ever come out of Myrtle Beach, South Carolina is Vanna White. Yeah, Vanna White. And I had her poster on my wall in college because she is a legend. There's only one other person from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, who could rightly be called a legend in addition to Vanna White. And it's a guy named David Black Doherty. Now, with a name like David Black Doherty, you'd think that he'd have to be a country singer, right? No, he wasn't a musician. He wasn't a TV celebrity. David Black Doherty, known by his nickname DB, DB Doherty attained legendary status for being fast. He wasn't an athlete or a race car driver. No, DB Doherty was an administrative law judge, and he became a legend because he was the fastest judge in Appalachia. Judge Doherty's chambers were located in the Social Security Administration's office in Huntington, West Virginia. That's the office where the Social Security Administration processed all of the SSDI claims that are filed in the Appalachia region, including those from Kentucky. And Judge Doherty was the jewel of the Huntington office. That's because D.B. Doherty was the judicial equivalent of Usain Bolt. He was a legend throughout the entire Social Security Administration because he got through his docket in lightning speed. During 2010, Judge Doherty was the third highest producing administrative law judge in the entire country. That year, he decided almost 1,400 cases. Many of Judge Doherty's peers, however, questioned how it was possible to decide so many cases when all of the other ones were struggling to finish a third of that. When asked by a fellow judge how he was deciding such a high volume of matters, Judge Doherty responded by saying, "You just have to learn which corners to cut." Well, D.B. Doherty was definitely cutting corners. No matter how clever a criminal might be, they often leave behind a trail. It's not always footprints or fingerprints. Sometimes it's patterns. And it's those patterns that usually get them caught. Sometimes they don't realize they're leaving behind those patterns. They may be invisible to the criminal, but glaring to those who know how to look. Other times, the criminal knows exactly how they're creating those patterns, but they don't care. Maybe they think no one is watching, or no one will be smart enough to see them. But they get seen. And sometimes they're seen by people who are just regular old people who weren't even actively looking for them. They just sort of pop up, and someone notices them by chance. Jennifer Griffith was one of those people. Jennifer was a stellar employee who worked as a master docket clerk at the Huntington, West Virginia office of the Social Security Administration. It was Jennifer's job to manage case intake. Basically, clerks like Jennifer received the disability cases that were being filed, and they assigned them to judges to handle. But around 2006, things started to fall apart for Jennifer. She was constantly being brought into her supervisor's office and reprimanded for what can only be described as a mess. The docketing system was getting screwed up, and as master docket clerk, it was her job to see that that didn't happen. Things were being assigned incorrectly, cases were being switched among judges, and the entire system just wasn't working right. The problem was, Jennifer had no idea why that was happening. She was doing everything correctly as far as she could tell, and yet things consistently seemed to be getting screwed up. In an effort to figure out what was going on, Jennifer started to run some reports. And that was when she started to see the patterns. Someone was interrupting the system. Instead of allowing the docket clerks to assign cases, Someone was getting into the court computer system and assigning cases to judges before the docket clerks ever had a chance to do so. Jennifer, to a certain extent, must have felt relieved. Listen, she hadn't fixed the problem or even figured out why it was happening, but at least she was starting to understand what was going on. Maybe with a little more attention, she could figure out who was doing this and why. What she didn't know was that the culprit was right under her nose. Lawyer Eric Conn sat in his office alone. He made sure the door was shut before he began this important phone call. He held the phone receiver to his ear by propping it up with his shoulder so he had both hands free to take notes. The person on the other end of the conversation spoke to Conn with a sense of efficiency. The two people went over a list of clients, names, social security numbers, details of the cases, medical issues, and the dates of their hearings. It was the type of conversation these two people had hundreds of times in the past, and it was a key component in maintaining the Eric Conn legal empire. After the conversation was done, Conn hung up the phone. He finished scribbling some notes, and then he did like he always did. He placed those notes in a file. The file was labeled the DB list. The person on the other end of the conversation also hung up the phone. After placing the receiver on the phone cradle, he looked up. His secretary had just walked into the office. She looked at him and said, "Judge Doherty, you're needed on the bench, sir." The deeper Jennifer Griffin got into the research, the more apparent the pattern became. She eventually realized who was short-circuiting the system, and it was Judge D.B. Doherty. Judge Doherty was signing into the court's computer system and assigning the cases on his own. In particular, he was assigning himself a slew of cases. And Jennifer noticed something else. Every single case that Judge Doherty was directing to his own docket was a client of lawyer Eric Conn. And when she dug a little deeper, it got worse. It seemed that if a case came in from Eric Conn's office and somehow got assigned to another court, then Judge Doherty would pop into the system and reassign that case to his courtroom. And then there was one final part of the pattern, and maybe it was the most concerning of all. Nearly every one of Eric Conn's clients who appeared before Judge Doherty were awarded disability benefits. Eric Conn had an almost 100% success rate in Judge Doherty's chambers. And the speed that Judge Doherty resolved those cases was insane. It was like an assembly line. None of this made any sense to Jennifer Griffith. Why was this happening? There was no incentive for Judge Doherty to get all these cases done quickly. I mean, it's not like his salary at the judiciary was tied to his results. Jennifer reported it up the ladder, but no one seemed to care. And the more she looked into it, the more concerned she became. But the more concerned she became, the less anyone else seemed to care. The whole thing got swept under the rug. And it might have stayed there were it not for one of Jennifer's co-workers. Jennifer's colleague, Sarah Carver, had been seeing the same pattern for years. Sarah was convinced that Judge Doherty was showing favoritism to Eric Conn's cases, and she was vocal about it for years. She even brought it to the attention of the chief administrative law judge, Judge Doherty's boss. The result? Nothing. Well, that's not entirely true. There was something that resulted from Sarah's complaints. The powers that be retaliated against her. Regardless, Sarah Carver was vigilant in reporting what she saw. She even went so far as writing an email where she complained, in her words, quote, "The Eric Conn situation is going to bite this office in the butt one day." Jennifer and Sarah would not relent. They believed that something was amiss with Judge Doherty, and they were not going to let the apparatchiks at the Social Security Administration play it down. So Jennifer and Sarah took the story to two places. The first was the Social Security Administration's Office of Inspector General, and the other was the press. On the morning of March 19th, 2011, Judge D.B. Doherty was probably sitting at his kitchen table in his home, getting ready to go to work. One could imagine him holding a cup of coffee as he read the paper, digesting the news. He probably never expected that he would be the most popular part of the news day. Yeah, it was on that day that the Wall Street Journal printed a devastating expose on Judge Daugherty and Eric Conn entitled, "Disability Claim Judge Has Trouble Saying No." The judge had to be squirming. Eric Conn must have been fuming. These whistleblowers were going to cause real problems for his very successful money-printing law practice. If that's what Eric Conn was thinking, he would have been right. Because once the article hit the papers, the investigation gathered steam. The FBI got involved, and the United States Senate even started hearings. That is when more patterns started to emerge. Investigators noticed something interesting on the doctor's reports that were submitted along with Eric Conn's clients' cases. It seemed that one doctor working for Mr. Conn submitted the exact same medical report for thousands of clients. The statistical probability that every client would have the same ailment in such large numbers was non-existent. That's when investigators started to realize that Eric Conn's practice wasn't so much a well-oiled machine as it was a rigged engine of deception. And it wasn't only the doctors that were in on it. There was that judge, too. According to the government, Judge Daugherty was a speedy jurist for a reason. But it wasn't because he was efficient. It was because he was involved in a scam. And here is how things allegedly happened, according to prosecutors. Eric Conn would talk to Judge Daugherty, and together they'd review his cases. They'd determine what type of medical information needed to be submitted to ensure that the case was approved. Conn would then arrange with doctors on his payroll to create phony reports for his clients. Where did Eric Conn find doctors who were willing to cooperate in such a scheme? Exactly where you'd expect. The internet. Conn would search the internet for doctors with sketchy pasts, maybe a history of malpractice issues, or doctors who might have lost their license for a little while at some point. You know, doctors who would be more likely to need cash and have, shall we say, looser professional morals. The reports they'd create were then submitted as part of the client's case, which would ultimately be heard by one judge, D.B. Daugherty. And that's why Judge Daugherty was able to approve cases so fast. The fix was in before they even got in front of him in the courtroom. And there was a good reason for the judge to be deciding those cases so quickly. It turns out he was getting paid per case. Every month, Eric Conn would withdraw $9,000 from his business account, and some part of that would go to Judge Daugherty. Over the years, it was estimated that the judge made over $600,000 from Eric Conn. Oh, and the doctors, they did okay too. Eric Conn paid the shifty physicians $650 per patient, and the scheme went on for so many years that one of the doctors made $1 million. It was the patterns that gave them all away. The same medical reports, the same judge handling all the cases, the same boilerplate language used by the judge in rendering decisions, and the same two whistleblowers who wouldn't give up. But Eric Conn was not about to give up either. The fire department in Stanville, Kentucky is volunteer-based. That's not exactly surprising, is it? I mean, it's a town of 500 people, so you would expect the fire department to be made up of locals who have other full-time jobs. So when the fire alarms went off in 2011, members of the Stanville Volunteer Fire Department probably had to drop what they were doing at those other jobs and head over to the station to deal with the situation. As they donned their gear, jumped into the truck, and headed to the location of the fire, they quickly realized that this was no false alarm. The smoke was probably visible from a distance. As they hurled down U.S. Highway 23, sirens blaring, the location of the fire came into view. It was the law offices of Eric Conn. As the firefighters approached the premises, however, they would have noticed something. Eric Conn's law office wasn't on fire. It was something behind the office that was burning. It seems that Eric Conn started a bonfire, and at the core of that blaze were all of his client records. But Conn wasn't just content to get rid of the physical files. He needed to trash the digital versions too. That's why he had an employee throw all of the office computers, along with the hard drives, into the same blaze. That bonfire lasted for 4 days. Yes, the cover-up had begun. And there was good reason to engage in that cover-up because there was a good chance that a ton of people would be going to jail. Eric Conn wasn't the only one at risk. Also implicated were the doctors, the judge, even the people at the Social Security Administration. All the people that ignored the whistleblowers for all those years had to be worried that they'd end up taking some kind of fall as well. And that's why it seems that everyone, and I mean everyone involved, went into cover-up mode. Whistleblower Sarah Carver knew that best. One day at Walmart, Sarah felt like she was being followed. She just couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Her hunch was right. There was a private investigator on her tail. Eric Conn had conspired with Judge Doherty's boss, the head administrative law judge at the Huntington office. The two men conspired to try to set up Sarah Carver. Sarah was working from home at the time under a telecommuting arrangement. The men had someone follow her and film her on days when she was working from home with the hopes that they'd find her violating the agency's telecommuting rules. Despite several attempts, they came up empty. And yes, that was orchestrated by Eric Conn and the chief judge of the Huntington office. And of course, no story about a cover-up is complete without some good old-fashioned paper shredding, right? In addition to his bonfire, Eric Conn hired a local shredding company to destroy over 3 million pages of documents. He threw everything into the shredder, including all hard copies of the DB lists, along with a warehouse full of files. And he wasn't the only one destroying evidence. The Social Security Administration was apparently doing the same thing. The agency approved the purchase of personal shredders for the office of the managers in the Huntington office. And this occurred in the middle of an investigation when the agency was legally obligated to preserve all of the relevant documents. When the embers from the fire cooled, there was a disaster waiting for Eric Conn in the ashes. The investigation revealed that Eric Conn and Judge Doherty colluded on a scheme to approve clients for disability benefits using manufactured medical evidence. After it was all tallied up, the government claimed that Eric Conn fraudulently obtained more than $550 million in federal disability payments from the Social Security Administration for thousands of claimants. After issuing a 40-page indictment, Eric Conn and others were charged with multiple federal offenses. On Monday, April 4, 2016 at 7:12 p.m., Eric Conn was booked into the Pike County Detention Center. Eric Conn sat in jail, contemplating his future. It certainly looked bleak. It was going to be even bleaker if he was going to be confined to that jail cell while he awaited trial. But there was a chance that he'd get some relief in that regard. As is the case with most people charged with criminal offenses, Conn would have the opportunity to ask to be released on bond so that he could be free while his trial was going on. It would not, however, be an easy ask because the FBI was opposed to it. At the bond hearing, Eric Conn surely turned on the charm. But instead of being the usual flamboyant blowhard that clients had come to know over his 20-plus year career, Conn was more likely contrite and humble. He had to be that way if he was going to convince the judge to let him out on bond. He explained that he built up a law practice for years and that he had no intention of giving it up. He wasn't a flight risk. The FBI wasn't buying it. An agent testified that Conn told a former employee that he'd rather escape to Ecuador or Cuba rather than end up in jail. The agent explained that another employee was asked by Conn to hide $240,000 in a safety deposit box. The FBI also claimed that Conn had money stashed away in 10 different countries. The FBI believed that Conn was absolutely a flight risk. But Conn's lawyers pressed the judge. He'd never fled before, they said, and there was no reason to think that he would now. After all, he's going to secure the bond with a lien on his own home. If he jumps bail, they asserted, the home would be seized, and Conn, he didn't want to lose that mansion. After hearing the two positions, the federal magistrate came down on the side of the defendant. Eric Conn was released on a $1.2 million bond. Conn was ordered to surrender his passport, and he was given an ankle monitor. He'd be on home confinement until the trial. But the case, it would never go to trial. The following year, Eric Conn agreed to flip. He pled guilty to theft and giving gratuities to a public official. He agreed to pay millions upon millions of dollars in fines and restitution, and he agreed to testify against his co-conspirators. So, with the issue of guilt wrapped up, the only thing for Eric Conn to do was be sentenced. He was facing as much as 12 years in prison, and he would find out his fate soon. But first he'd have to testify against his co-conspirators, and he might have found some solace in that. After all, if they were being found guilty too, then Eric Conn would not be the only person who ended up holding the bag. And speaking of bags, these days there's a mantra for people in the United States when they see an abandoned bag somewhere. If you see something, say something. Well, apparently that's what happened in Lexington, Kentucky. Someone saw something. And the thing they saw was a backpack sitting on the side of Interstate 75. And when they saw it, they did as dutiful citizens were expected to do. They said something. The officers who were called to investigate that bag surely approached it with caution. And when they opened it, they realized that there was indeed something explosive inside. It wasn't something that would detonate in their face, but it was something that would be a bombshell in the news. Inside the bag was the ankle monitor that Eric Conn was supposed to be wearing. Conn was on home confinement awaiting sentencing when he apparently had enough. He cut off the ankle monitor, threw it into a knapsack, and took off. While barreling down Interstate 75 in Lexington, Kentucky, he threw the backpack out the window and kept on driving. And driving, and driving, and driving. All the way across country. And shortly thereafter, a 70-ish-year-old man wearing a black T-shirt walked into a Walmart in New Mexico and bought a bottle of water and a burrito. The clerk didn't know she was talking to Eric Conn, convicted fraudster on the run. She didn't know that the FBI had put out a reward for information about his whereabouts. And no one knew that Eric Conn had that planned all along. Fleeing was apparently not an impulsive act. No, Eric Conn had prepared for this moment, and it seems that he had help. He must have had help. That's the only way Eric Conn would have been able to get the pickup truck that he drove to New Mexico. It was only with help that he would know how to cross the border into Mexico. It was only with help that he'd be able to get a prepaid credit card that he would use to buy a plane ticket overseas. And only with some sort of help would he have been able to have a fake passport at the ready that he'd use to board a commercial jet. And that's the only way Eric Conn could have successfully made it to Honduras, a country 2,500 miles away from the scene of his crime. The FBI didn't know where Conn had landed, but they were on his tail. After they saw the security cameras in New Mexico, authorities headed southwest and found that pickup truck at the Mexican border. Then they got some more information, but they didn't have to search for those additional clues. They just came to them. The FBI got some emails and saw social media postings from someone they thought was Eric Conn. He was taunting them at times. Sometimes he was taunting them, and other times he was complaining. He was complaining that he was being treated unfairly. He was upset that after deciding to testify against his co-conspirators, those co-conspirators were apparently going to get less jail time than he did. That, he said, is what caused him to run. Eric Conn must have been sitting at a bar in Honduras thinking about his next move. He was in the city of La Ceiba along the Caribbean coast. Maybe he was staring out into the water. It was about a month since he fled the United States, and he probably got to thinking about where he'd go from here. What could he possibly do? Was he going to stay in that country forever? Would he run from country to country? He had money stashed, but was it enough to pay his bills forever? And listen, this wasn't 1917, it was 2017. The internet existed. Information flowed across the globe, and eventually, no matter where he went, people would figure out who he was, and he realized he'd probably have to deal with the FBI. As that reality sank in, Conn decided to try to negotiate a deal. He sent another couple of emails. This time, one went to the Lexington Herald-Leader newspaper and another to his lawyers. He used them as conduits to the federal authorities. In those messages, he tried to negotiate his surrender. He'd turn himself in, he told them, if he wouldn't face charges for fleeing. Conn probably spent most of his time wondering whether the United States government would accede to his surrender conditions, wondering where this entire fiasco would end up. He might have been thinking of that one day after he ate pizza at a Pizza Hut in a shopping center in La Ceiba. He got his answer when he finished that meal. As he left the restaurant, Eric Conn was arrested by agents of the Honduras Technical Agency for Criminal Investigation while he was walking through the parking lot of the shopping center. The saga was over for Eric Conn, but it was just beginning for some very unfortunate people. In the shadow of Eric Conn's rigged engine of deception, the people who trusted him, people like Mary Sexton, they faced a nightmare that they never saw coming. That's because when Conn's fraud was exposed, the Social Security Administration turned its gaze on his clients. They demanded that those clients prove their disabilities all over again. Think about it. If Conn's applications for disability were all manufactured, then how did the government know if those people were really entitled to benefits? For Mary Sexton, it meant losing the $1,100 a month lifeline she'd fought for. In 2015, her benefits vanished, and with them, her home. She slept in her car for weeks, too ashamed to tell her mother. Her health was crumbling under the weight of it all. Mary wasn't alone. Around 3,700 of Conn's clients faced hearings, forced to prove that they were disabled years earlier, sometimes a decade ago. And most of them had no records because Conn had burned the files. About 1,700 of those clients went through the ringer, and half, 850, lost their benefits. Not only did these people lose their benefits, but they had to return them to the federal government. People didn't have that kind of money to return to the government, so they ended up going into debt. Thousands of Conn's former clients would be required to pay millions of dollars back to the government, and they didn't have the money. So they went on payment plans. For some, the loss was just too much, and at least one person committed suicide. Some heroes did emerge. There were lawyers who fought for dozens of clients pro bono. They didn't charge them a thing. They fought in federal courts, and they won benefits back for about 230 clients, including Mary Sexton, whose payments resumed in 2020 after 5 agonizing years. Of course, the Social Security Agency wasn't done. Letters arrived threatening new hearings, demanding that Mary and others prove their disabilities once again. Mary couldn't believe it. She said with tears in her eyes, "It's like I did something wrong." The weight of Eric Conn's betrayal lingered as a ghost haunting their every step. In 2024, there was a breakthrough. There was a new Social Security Administration commissioner, and she was moved by the plight of these victims, and she made an historic call. The agency sent letters to Conn's former clients. No more back payments owed for Conn's fraud. Tens of millions of dollars in crushing debt, some as high as $200,000, were all erased. Mary Sexton, now living with her mom, felt the weight of the world lifted off of her shoulders. In 2017, Judge Doherty got 4 years in prison. His boss, who conspired to retaliate against one of the whistleblowers, he got 6 months in prison. A key doctor who helped Eric Conn was sentenced to 25 years. But Eric Conn was hit the hardest. After adding in charges relating to his fleeing, Conn was given a total of 27 years. He's currently serving his sentence in federal prison at Fort Dix in New Jersey, and he's scheduled to be released in 2039. Thank you for listening to the podcast, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. Remember, we've got another episode coming out in 2 weeks, and then after that, it will be on the 30th, and then I'll go back to every 2 weeks. I hope that you enjoyed it. Please go to your podcast platform of choice and like and subscribe and leave us a review. It really does make a difference. Thanks very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.